HaYehudim, the Jews accepted. Learning this Maamar, the Jews accepted upon themselves what they had begun to do. What had they begun to do? They had started the acceptance of the giving of the Torah, which started about 1,000 years ago. Purim story, they fully accepted the giving of the Torah. We say that's interesting that it's going to be Purim time because it seems like the giving of the Torah is the right time for the giving of the Torah. They're at the spiritual heights, physically they were free. That seems the right time for the giving of the Torah. Purim was like a total opposite. What's distinct about Purim? According to the Frierdiker Rebbe's Maamar, the previous Rebbe's Maamar this is based on, they displayed actual Mesiras Nefesh. They actually showed it. They studied Torah in public. Nobody tried to convert out or anything like that, God forbid. Not just that, Mordechai, who was the Moshe of his generation, awakened this level within the people. Mordechai specifically taught the Jewish school children, 22,000 school children, that he would sit and teach Torah. And we saw that when Haman came and like, go run and save yourselves, the children said, no, we're with you all the way. This is the conclusion, is that they showed Mesiras Nefesh as in self-sacrifice. They showed this at the time of Purim. That's why it culminates the giving of the Torah. So the Rebbe has about 4 questions on this. Number 1 is that why are we talking about Mordechai and the school children? The whole emphasis, hey, they had Mesiras Nefesh. And then we're in this tangent of Mordechai and the school children. Where is that coming from? Then we compared the spiritual state of the Jewish people. Why are we also comparing the physical state? The next question is, the whole emphasis is living by the mitzvahs, not dying for the mitzvahs. We saw a lot of texts about Mesiras Nefesh, when you have to, the time of persecution, if you're in public, if you're in private, time of religious persecution. The thing is to live for the mitzvahs, not to die for the mitzvahs. And then we had the question of Purim and Hanukkah, they also risk themselves. So what is it distinctly about Purim that culminates everything? To understand this all, we have to understand what is the objective, what was the whole purpose of the giving of the Torah? It wasn't just about giving over the laws, because they knew them already. First of all, the forefathers kept the laws. Also, there were laws that were given to them while they were in Egypt. The first mitzvah the Jewish people were directly given was to sanctify the new moon. It's not just, you have to know when the calendars align, but we can see it's the blessing is to sanctify time itself. Make sure that you're not negligent about time, making sure that your time is a sanctified time, and using your time correctly. What is the main objective of the giving of Torah? Was the fusion, that higher and lower should be able to meet, that spirituality and physicality confuse, because otherwise they're like the wrong ends of the magnet. They don't align, they don't connect with each other. How can you have 2 total opposites align? Something physical is not only elevated, but can even be transformed now by a mitzvah. So only when something that overrides both can 2 come together. So we saw examples with that with angel Gabriel and angel Michael. So Michael and Gabriel, one's the prince of water, one's the prince of fire. They should extinguish each other, and yet they make peace between them because God's essence overrides both. For the sake of something higher, 2 different could come together. I mentioned that today, go into any shul, any synagogue, any temple, you'll see all different kinds of people there. Because when we're all coming together and we all believe in the one God, we're all believing in the service that we're doing, so many different types can be there. Because it's not about the differences anymore. The differences are all overridden by the higher thing that we're all there for. Then we got to what the main middle bulk of the Maamar is about. After the giving of the Torah, we introduced, there's 3 aspects of a mitzvah. There's the physical aspect of it. Physical stays physical, as in, like originally when physical and spiritual can't align, so there's the physical world that even after the mitzvah is done, it stays physical, it remains a physical object. Elyon, the higher aspect of things, whatever spiritual remains spiritual in substance, for lack of a better word. Then you have the what we call batal, subjugated, 2 opposites coming together. That's the higher level that we can reach when 2 opposites come together. That's when they're both being nullified before that which is greater. So this can now be achieved after the giving of the Torah. How does that apply to the fulfillment of a mitzvah? And when you're actually doing the mitzvah, what does that look like? The lower aspect is when you train your body, the habit, so you just do it. Emphasis on the physical action that you're doing. The higher aspect, my soul is motivating me from my love of God, so I want to connect to Him. So that's spiritually driven. But now how do we see the fusion of the 2? The fusion of the 2 happens when it's not just about the habit I've trained myself into. It's not just about I personally feel love to God, I want to connect to Him. It's about the fact that there's something higher out there that God gave us a mitzvah, and therefore body and soul need to come together to do the mitzvah. So both sides now will come together to do the mitzvah because so God has commanded. So a bunch of text with that, and then we actually got up to this part. This is what we were in the middle of last time, where it's the 3 approaches to mitzvah. Number 1, you have the lower aspect of it, that mitzvahs were given to refine man in creation. So why did God give us a mitzvah? Because we're physical entities in a physical world. We're so coarse, we need the mitzvahs to refine us. That focuses on all the physical world, physical creations. That's tachton, the lower aspect. Elyon, the higher aspect, is that mitzvahs were given so we walk in His ways and to connect with Him in levels above creation. So it's not just about I am a coarse entity that needs to be refined. It's the sense that I want to do as God does and thereby connect with Him above creation. I want to attach myself to His ways. That's soul, spiritual driven. Then you have batal, the subjugated level, the fusion level. And that's the whole idea that a mitzvah makes man significant and it connects into the essence of the commander. When God gives us a mitzvah, we now become relevant in His world, per se. We are now given significance because the commander himself has given us to do, and now that brings us into relevancy. Anyway, we started looking at it last time about the idea of the lower level of tachton, that the mitzvahs refine man in creation. And we saw from Medrash Tanchuma, Parsha Shmini, the Medrash starts talking about, God says you have to guard yourself, don't make yourself impure with the impure beast, don't defile yourself with it. That it says God ways is perfect, His ways are pure. It uses the word trufa, Torah. So we were given mitzvahs to refine, to make us pure, basically. So that's where they bring in, what does God care about the way you slaughter an animal? One on this side of the neck, that side of the neck, etc. So it says, no, the whole thing is just to make us pure. That's why we have to go through all these rituals. This is a different part of the Medrash Tanchuma, also in Parsha Shemini, but it's talking about the same idea. It says, this is the animal you shall eat, quoting from the Torah. This is what the verse stated. To do your will, my God, have I desired. And your Torah is in my innards. That's actually a verse from Tehillim. Happy Israel. Ashrechem Yisrael also means, how fortunate are you? How fortunate are you, the Jewish people? As he gave a commandment for each and every one of their limbs, as there are 248 limbs in a man. Therefore we say every day, blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who has created man with wisdom and created him many holes and many channels. The numerical equivalent of many channels, chalalim, is 248. That is like the tally of limbs in a man. The blessing that's being referred to here, it says, blessed are you, Lord our God, is Asher Yatzar. Asher Yatzar, Sa'adam b'chachma v'rava nekavim. If you're familiar with that blessing, that's the blessing that we say it in the morning blessings, and we say it after we go to the bathroom. Thanks God that I'm functioning correctly. And the blessing itself is in that blessing is, God, you're so smart that you made us with all these opening and channels so that the whole body can function properly. Gets rid of what it doesn't need, and then everything goes according to how it's supposed to go. Here, it's using this to say the Jewish people are given 248 commandments that corresponds with the 248 limbs of man. Each mitzvah as a channel is attached to one of the limbs. That's how we purify the self. And it looked at this blessing about God, you create us with wisdom. Nekavim, chalulim. Chalim is 248. The gematria of chalim is 248, so that shows that each limb is connected to one of the 248 positive mitzvahs. There's 365 prohibitive, thou shalt nots, and 248 action, thou shalt do. Because 365 is just refrain from action, but the 248 requires action. That means that we're moving our body, some part of our body, to do it. There's actually a whole idea that we talk about sort of connected to this. The 248 limbs that we talk about. We say that God's hand or God this or that. We're just using anthropomorphisms. We're giving God human characteristics, but it's really kind of the opposite. Well, we have some pale physical imitation of what the divine hand looks like. Whatever it means for God to have this form, this figure, this hand, and we have some sort of lower grade version of it that's manifest in this physical form. Okay, so this next part here, this is more about the mitzvahs refining man. This is from Bereshis Rabbah. Book of Bereshis, the Medrash on Bereshis. So this is, after these matters, the word of Hashem came to Avram in a vision. It's called Avraham. He's not Avraham yet. Fear not, Avraham, I am a shield for you. Your reward is very great. So that's the verse that it's speaking of. Now it gives us the commentary on that. After these matters, the word of the Lord came to Avram in a vision, saying, or the word of Hashem, the Almighty's way is faultless. The word of Hashem is refined. So here it's using the word tzrufa again. Well, because it's quoting the same verse of Tehillim, so that's why it's using the word tzrufa again. He is a shield for all who take refuge in him. If his ways are faultless, all the more so that he himself is. So if everything he does is perfect, then of course he is perfect. Rav said the mitzvahs were given only to refine letzaref people through them. Lo nidnu ha-mitzvahs ela letzaref behen es habrios. This word letzaref is connected to the word of tzrufa. How do we know that we say that's the refined? Because he's connecting it. That God, everything that you do is refined and pure. The mitzvahs were given to us to purify us. After all, watch the whole and blessed be he care whether one slaughters an animal from the throat or slaughters it from the nape. Thus we learn that the mitzvahs were given only to refine the creations with them. You see, they're using this example. Some mitzvahs are a little bit harder than others to understand why we have them, which you're going to see now the Rambam is going to talk about. Because certain mitzvahs we can understand why God would tell us that, or at least on some measure we can understand. We're like, oh, I see where he's going with this. Maybe I don't fully get it. Maybe I want to come up with it on my own, but I see where he's going with this. But this whole idea of how to shecht an animal, why can't I just put a bullet in him? Why does it have to be here, not here? Why does it have to be like this, like this? Who cares? Why does God care how I slaughter the animal? It's a cow. It's a chicken. So why does he care about the details of it? So the sages are saying all this is to purify us. Which again, this is approaching it from the lower aspect of things, as in the physical aspect of things. So now we're going to have a bunch of text here. This is from Mar Nevuchim. Mar Nevuchim is what the Rambam wrote. It's the guide to the perplexed. What the Rambam does with Mar Nevuchim is approaches everything from a rather logical approach to Torah mitzvahs. Mishnah Torah, which is 14 books. The study of Rambam that the Rebbe instituted is the part where the Rambam goes through all the mitzvahs, explaining what the mitzvahs are and where they come from and things like that. High achievers, they do 3 chapters a day, 14 books. It's not a little, it's a lot. Then there are some people who do 1 chapter a day. So you learn 1 chapter of the Rambam explaining whatever the division of the mitzvahs are. And then the other level is what's called the Sefer HaMitzvahs. So that's where the Rambam counts out, these are the 613 mitzvahs and this is where they come from. It's the bridge version of the 3-chapter study. Some people learn it in the text, so it's usually short paragraphs, sometimes it can be longer paragraphs, or some people just look at it, an English summary of it, 1 or 2 lines. The Rebbe was very much into that everybody should learn Rambam, specifically Sefer mitzvahs, because you gotta know what the mitzvahs are. The Rambam delineates the mitzvahs for us, he gives the sources for them, he has a whole introduction about how he counted out the mitzvahs. Details of a mitzvah are not considered a separate mitzvah. There's a positive and a prohibitive, and that can be 2 separate mitzvahs. You have to know, because if not, it seems like there's a lot more than 613 commandments. So you have to know how to group it all. So this is something the Rebbe instituted, that everybody should study the Rambam. Anyways, this is Mar Nevuchim. This is the guide for the perplexed. So let's go through lots of text. The Rambam's going to explain all this, doing a lot of clarifications. So it's more like a philosophical logic approach. Okay, as theologians are divided on the question whether the actions of God are the result of his wisdom or only of his will without being intended for any purpose whatever, so they're also divided as regards the object of the commandments which God gave us. Basically, Rambam's saying, bringing in this argument of Did God give us mitzvahs with intent? Is there a reason for the mitzvahs, or did God just tell us, hey, these are the rules that you guys got to play by, have fun with it? Is there a reason for them, or did God just give us stuff because that was his whim and desire? Some of them hold that the commandments have no reason at all and are only dictated by the will of God. So I want, so you should do. I don't have to explain myself to you. Others are of opinion that all commandments and prohibitions are dictated by his wisdom and serve a certain aim. Consequently, there's a reason for each one of the precepts. They're enjoyed because they're useful. So some people say God has no reason for giving us the mitzvahs, he just desired, so he gave it to us. And some people know there's reason for all the mitzvahs, and also the mitzvahs are very useful for us. All of us, the common people as well as the scholars, believe that there is a reason for every precept. So the Rambam is taking the side of, yes, there's a reason for everything. Although there are commandments, the reason which is unknown to us, and which the ways of God's wisdom are incomprehensible. So we might not know or understand the reason, but there is a reason for all the mitzvahs. God didn't just confetti, take, how many did you guys want? This view is distinctly expressed in scripture, righteous statutes and judgments. So he's giving us a verse here. The judgments of Hashem are true and righteous altogether, as in saying that they're righteous, saying that there's purpose for all of them. There are commandments which are called chukim, ordinances. Remember we learned about this in Hanukkah, that there's 3 categories of mitzvahs. The civil laws that we can understand, we probably would come up with on our own. The testimonials, which are basically holidays. The whole Pesach Seder, like I don't know if I would have come up with the 15 steps, but I see where we're going with this. Then you have the chukim, which make no sense at all. Why can't I have a cheeseburger? Why not? Like their prohibition of wearing garments of wool and linen. Remember Shatnez? You can't mix wool and linen together, boiling meat and milk together, and the sending off the goat into the wilderness on the Day of Atonement. So you see the Rambam's bringing the goat, he's saying this is a chok. What does God want with us? Why are we shoving the goat off? They say actually the goat like gets shoved off. He's like, I don't want to get shoved off, I want to be offered as a sacrifice. I had the short and the stick, and it's just as God is sanctified through the sacrifice, God is sanctified through this as well. Ultimately, as we learned in Hanukkah, we don't fully understand. Whatever we know is just enough for us to let our brains chew over, but don't really, because you can't. God's infinite. How can we understand him? So, which our sages wrote on them and said, these are the things which I have fully ordained for you, and you dare not criticize them. So they're talking here about the chukim, the laws that we don't understand. Your evil inclination is turned against them, and non-Jews find them strange. You don't get it, and people don't get it. Why are you doing these things? But our sages generally do not think that such precepts have no cause whatever and serve no purpose. So this would lead us to assume that God's actions are purposeless. So even these ones that we don't understand, we don't say that there's no reason for them, because then you're just saying, what, God is just wandering around? There's no purpose to what God does? God just does stuff? There's no thought pattern to it? There's nothing there? So we can't say that they are without reason. On the contrary, they hold that even these ordinances have a cause. Ordinances talk about the chukim, and are certainly intended for some use, although it's not known to us. So we just don't get it, owing either to the deficiency of our knowledge or the weakness of our intellect. You don't get it because you can't get it. Consequently, there is a cause for every commandment. Every positive or prohibitive precept serves a useful purpose. So there's a reason for it, and everything is useful to us. In some cases, the usefulness is evident. For example, the prohibition of murder and theft. We're like, yes, we understand why these are not allowed. In others, the usefulness is not so evident. For example, the prohibition of enjoying the fruit of a tree in the first 3 years. That's called orla. When you plant a tree, you can't enjoy that tree basically for the first 3 years of its planting. You can't take the fruits from it or anything like that. Or of a vineyard in which seeds have been growing. There's a whole thing about kalayim, mixing seeds together. Mix 2 animals together to plow. Like you can't take an ox and a donkey and say, okay, plow the field. The whole thing of mixtures. So you're not allowed to mix seeds together, which is part of why we're not allowed to graft. But here it's talking about that if there's something about a vineyard, that there's other seeds growing in it, you're not allowed to eat them. Like if some other thing is growing there, you're not allowed to eat it. Which, that don't make no sense. But that's the way it is. Those commandments whose reason is generally evident are called judgments, mishpatim. Oh, I understand this. Murder, theft, I understand. Those whose reason is not generally clear are called ordinances, chukim, statutes they usually translate as. Thus they say in reference to the words of Moshe, for it is not a vain thing for you. That Moshe says this is not a vain, this is not a nothing thing for you. It is not in vain, and if it is in vain, it is only so through you. As in, not a vain thing, I haven't just given you stuff without purpose. There's purpose for it. And if you find this as being something like, oh, what's the point of all this? No, it's actually you. It's not the mitzvah, it's you. That is to say, the giving of these commandments is not a vain thing without any useful object, as in vain, as in without purpose, for no reason. And if it appears so to you in any commandment, it is owing to the deficiency in your comprehension. Rambam is basically saying the fact that we can't understand is because of us, not because that God has no reason for it. So we're like, how? This part of the Torah doesn't make sense, and you get all upset about it. It's like, yes, it doesn't make sense, because an infinite God has given it to us, and we can only know so much. You're getting frustrated about it. It's not because, oh, everything has no purpose and everything's dumb. It's because we can't reach the level. You certainly know the famous saying that King Solomon knew the reason for all commandments except that of the red heifer, the paradumar. We learned about it with the Maamar. The red heifer, and it has to be the living waters. The reason why it's called a chok is because officially we had 9 already, and then the 10th one is going to be when Mashiach comes. And what it was is that it had to be this perfect red cow, couldn't have a yoke on it, couldn't have any amount of white hairs. They checked it very carefully, and there's this whole process about how they would burn it, mix it with the living waters, and they would use it to purify people. They got sprinkled on them if someone was there, a dead body or whatever it was, and they had to be purified. There was a whole 7-day and the mikveh and this, that, and then we sprinkle them with the waters, and now you're pure. So the reason why it's called a chok is because the person who prepared it, I'm now preparing this for you to become holy, became impure himself. How does that make sense? That means you have to be outside the camp. You can't go into the base of the mikdash. You can't partake of certain things. You have to be secluded and do the mikveh thing and all that kind of stuff for 7 days. So that's why it's considered a chok. So King Solomon, even the harder mitzvahs that we don't understand, he can figure it out. This one, he's like, I don't get this one. Our sages also said that Hashem concealed the causes of commandments lest people should be careless with them. As King Solomon did in respect to 3 commandments, the reason for which is clearly stated. In this sense, they always speak, and scripture texts support the idea. Here the Rambam's adding a new thing in that he says that God doesn't explain the mitzvahs to us fully because some of them will be like, Hashem didn't tell us, so we can't be like, I don't agree with this. People do that anyways, I've heard. But this also goes back to the Hanukkah Maamar. Remember we spoke about the whole idea is going above the realm of logic. As soon as you bring something into the realm of logic, then that means I can argue with you. As soon as I can argue with you, I've already tainted it. I've already shown that this is something that can be lowered. There's some room for argument here. So the Rambam's kind of bringing a similar idea here that God doesn't tell it to us, but people should be like, I don't like your reasoning for this. And he actually cites, talking about King Solomon, Shlomo Melech, there are 3 mitzvahs of a king. There's a few. The king has to write a Torah, 2 Torah scrolls, one they keep and one they have to carry them at all times. There are 3 mitzvahs that are very particular to the king. Don't have too many wives, don't have too much money, don't have too many horses. And King Solomon went a little bit above on all of them. He was so smart, so wise, the wisest of all, that he kind of outsmarted himself a little bit on them. So that's why the Rambam's bringing it in here. So he says, you see, this can happen. You can get too smart when it comes to the mitzvahs. I have, however, found one utterance made by the Bereshis Rabbah, which we just saw, going back to the Medrash that we just saw, which might at first sight appear to imply that some commandments have no other reason but the fact that they are commanded, that no other purpose is intended by them, and that they do not serve any useful purpose. So Rambam's like, actually, you found something that you might believe it to say that, no, there's no other reason for this. I mean the following passage. What difference does it make to Hashem whether a beast is killed by cutting the neck in front or in the back? Why does God care how we kill the animal? Surely the commandments are only intended as a means of trying man, and according to the verse, the word of Hashem is a test. So it's like, maybe God gives us all the details because he's testing us. Although this passage is very strange, it has no parallel in the writings of our sages. I explained it, as you shall soon hear, in such a manner that I remain in accord with the meaning of their words. Do not depart from the principle which we agreed upon, that the commandments serve a useful object, for it is not a vain thing for you. So Rambam says, look, I'm going to explain this to you so you should know that this is not just something frivolous that God gave us as a reason for it. I have not said to the children of Yaakov, seek me in vain. I Hashem speak righteousness, clear that which is right. This is a quote out from Isaiah, from Yeshaya. I will not tell you what intelligent persons ought to believe in this respect. Namely, that each commandment has necessarily a cause, as far as its general character is concerned, and serves a certain object. So every mitzvah is given for a purpose. But as regards its details, we hold that it has no ulterior reason. So the Rambam is saying the mitzvah has a purpose, but the details might not necessarily have a higher purpose. Thus, killing animals for the purpose of obtaining good food is certainly useful, as we intend to show that, however, the killing should not be performed by nechir, which is poleaxing the animal, but by shchita, cutting the neck. Okay, so we don't just chop up an animal and say, okay, now we can eat it. There's a particular way. And by dividing the esophagus and the windpipe in a certain place, these regulations and the like are nothing but tests for man's obedience. In this sense, you'll understand the example quoted by our sages. There is no difference between killing the animal by cutting its neck in front and cutting it in the back. I give this instance only because it has been mentioned by our sages. They brought it up first. That's why I chose this from all of them. But in reality, there is some reason for these regulations, so the Rambam's still acknowledging, fine, everything does have a reason. For as it has become necessary to eat the flesh of animals, it was intended by the above regulations to ensure an easy death and to effect it by suitable means. As in, why do we shecht an animal the way that we do? To give it an easy death. Basically the most merciful death that we could. While decapitation requires a sword or a similar instrument, shechita can be performed with any instrument. In order to ensure an easy death, our sages insisted the knife should be well sharpened. There's rules about how sharp the knife have to be. They have to test the knife constantly to make sure that it's maintaining its sharpness when they do shechita. So here the Rambam went through this whole explanation how to say, we can't say the mitzvahs have no reason. They do have a reason, all the mitzvahs. We don't necessarily understand all the reasons, but they're there. Maybe there's some argument here about in regard to the details, if they only give it to test us or not, but as a general idea, all the mitzvahs actually have a reason. And this they're aligning because the whole fact that we could talk about reason and logic and things like that, this is still considered the lower aspect of a mitzvah.